How do you see the role of officers, that's planning, legal and governance officers, in preparing for and at committee meetings? And particularly given your experience as chairs, does your view of officers and relationship with officers change being a chair?
Well, I think the role of officers is a very important one because they give the contribution to ensure that we actually achieve a correct outcome. Because if listening to their advice, it ensures that you minimise the risk of any successful challenge to the decisions that you make. So the officer report is obviously a key part of the consideration by the planning committee. As to whether or not I've got a different view now, my first role as chairman was coming up for nearly 30 years ago. So actually I can't even remember what my view of the role of officers was prior to that, but I suspect it's much the same. At the end of the day, the officers have a professional role to do. They've got their professional code of conduct if they're members of the RTPI, which indeed most would be. They have to act impartially and not politically, and they're politically neutral. So the advice that they give, the recommendations that they make with that background are certainly going to be objective. That isn't to say that they would necessarily always be right, and that's where we as members need to scrutinise the recommendations that they make, and obviously ask the questions to perhaps point out any areas that we might disagree with what they're saying. But at the end of the day, it's important, obviously, to listen to them, particularly the legal advice if you're looking at areas of possible challenge, and as far as the planning reasons and policy reasons that are outlined in their report, then those give us the clear guidelines when we come to our decision making.
Okay, thank you, Mike. Adele.
Yes, I agree with a lot of that. I mean, the aim of planning is to get the best outcome for our communities. And actually, it's really important that you're working as a team with your officers because we all should have the same aims and motivations. Reading the papers and asking questions in advance is important. I always say that the committee meeting is not the beginning of the process, and by the time it arrives before you at your committee meeting, there's not really a lot of scope for big negotiations. Either you refuse it, you approve it, you might be able to tweak some conditions. Member officer relationships at committee, I think, need to be cooperative, and officers need to support members. It's really important that there's never a situation where either members or officers are being rude to each other or trying to make either side look stupid. You might come to a different view, as Mike says, and that's why we have members making decisions, but that doesn't mean the officers are wrong in that sense. It's just how they just have approached it differently in some cases. In terms of the kind of different relationship that chairs have with officers, I mean, chairs and sometimes vice chairs will have more engagement with the officers around preparing for the committee, what's going on the agenda, any particular areas of concern or complications that you might expect. But actually, all committee members should have access to officers in order for them to ask questions in advance of the meetings. There shouldn't be a situation where officers are refusing to engage with members to have some kind of discussion in advance of a committee meeting.
Okay, thank you very much. And so if you disagree with an officer recommendation and think that an alternative decision is justified, how do you approach this? And are there differences between how you might approach it before the meeting and during the meeting?
Well, of course, you shouldn't be coming into a meeting having already decided whether you're approving or refusing something. The rules are quite clear around that. And if you do think that there's no possible way that you could change your fixed view, you should probably be asking yourself the reasons for that and whether or not it's appropriate for you to be sitting at that item. You can ask officers in advance why they've given weight to a particular aspect when you think it should be given less weight than something else. And particularly if, as is often the case when things come to a planning committee, you know, generally it's because they are controversial or major, you know, they move away from policy, all sorts of reasons like that. And that will often be a recommendation has been made balancing the different elements and the different aspects. In terms of the decision making in the meeting, I'd only propose a refusal if I thought I had valid policy reasons for doing so. I would have read the papers in advance. I would have familiarised myself with any material issues or any policies, any particular policies that are referred to. And actually, sometimes you do hear things from either the applicants or objectors that, or ward members who know an area particularly well, that might make you think that it strengthens the reasons, material planning reasons that they have given, and that which might help to tilt your balance in a particular way. In Southwark, when we make recommendations to overturn an officer recommendation, we would generally be expected to give the broad policy reasons there and then the full policy details would be written up separately. Having said that, we don't have many officer overturns in Southwark, and that's because we do a lot of work in advance of the meeting, talking to officers and going through, reading the papers, asking questions, so that we're sure that when something comes before our committee, we have squeezed out of it, as it were, the best outcome that we think is possible.
Okay, thank you. Mike.
Okay. Well, if it's something you know about before the meeting, then I would always discuss it with the officer prior to the meeting. So you know, that's where I stand. If it's something that comes up during the course of the meeting, and obviously, you know, this is always going to be a possibility since you still haven't made your mind up till you've heard all of the arguments. So, for example, if one of the public speakers raises a point that you're not, you know, sort of weren't aware of before, and therefore that is going to be something you need to take into account, then obviously I'll have to ask questions on that in the meeting itself if I felt it was relevant to the decision I was going to come to. But certainly I don't come along or go along to a meeting with something sort of ready there to sort of bring a rabbit out of the hat, you know, sort of to put the officer on the back foot and sort of have an element of surprise and the hope that other members might go along with it, because I don't see that as an objective way of coming to a correct decision. That may work as a sort of a stunt in the short term, but it isn't how I operate. So if I know something beforehand that I feel I need to ask, then I will ask the officer prior to the meeting. It's only if something comes up later that I wouldn't. And there are differences there as well. If it's something that's in my own ward and I've asked for it to go to committee, then there would have been already a dialogue with the officer explaining my rationale. I mean, if I've asked for it to go to committee, if the officer's minded to approve it, then I would have initially identified the reasons why I have concerns, and I may then, having read the agenda report, decide to speak to the officer, email them to further explore the issues that I was concerned about that led to me asking for it to go to committee in the first place. So that's as a ward member. Obviously, if it's not in my ward, then it perhaps comes to my attention when the agenda is published. And if, having read the agenda through, there's questions, and again, I would highlight to the officer what my concerns are prior to the meeting, so that they've had an opportunity to look at any background material that might help to answer that point, so they don't have to sort of look around during the meeting, because that appears unprofessional to the public watching anyway if they haven't got it. And you can tell them what it is you're going to ask, so they'll be able to come up with that. In my role as chairman currently, then of course I have a pre-meeting with the officers going through all the items on the agenda. And so, having read through the agenda, then if there are any issues that I have concerns about, then I'll raise them at that meeting, as will my vice chairman who attends it with me. But clearly, if I'm not chairman, then I would need to make sure I email those through beforehand. So the bottom line for me is no surprises, getting professional performance at committee so that the right decision is reached.
Okay, thank you, Mike. And finally, Adele, as a venerable planning committee member with sound judgment, what is your single piece of advice for your peers across the country aspiring to be the best planning committee member they can be?
Do your homework. Make sure that you get access to information as early as you can. Read the papers, familiarise yourself if you can with some of your council's basic policies, in the local plans, and indeed with the national policies and any policies that are in the neighbourhood plans that you've got, and make sure that you have got access to them, whether that's your own hard copy or you know exactly where to find them on the web, so that when you're looking at your application in advance, if you're giving any thought to questioning, you've got some reference points.
Okay, thank you very much, and thank you very much to both of you, and that's been very interesting and informative, and so I look forward to seeing you again shortly. Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.